They're stepping over piles of money to get to the pennies today to find cost savings. And when you really shine some light on this, you figure out better ways to align or errors being made that you didn't realize that could cost you later.
That was Gail Peace. She's the founder of Ludi. And Gail's explaining why hospitals need a better system to show what they're spending and where. You're listening to How I Transformed This, presented by Versus 12. Versus 12 is the award-winning Salesforce Gold consulting partner focused on healthcare innovation nationwide. In this episode, Gail explains how Ludi helps physicians get paid correctly and saves hospitals money in the process. She also discusses some of the innovations that she's seeing in the midst of COVID-19 and offers her predictions about how they'll impact the future of healthcare. I'm your host, Clark Buckner, and along with Versus 12 founder and CEO Tammy Hawes, each episode we're seeking out healthcare technology industry leaders, exploring stories of success through the transformation of healthcare. For more stories like this, head on over to versus12.com/podcast. There's a lot to cover in this episode, so let's jump right in.
I'm Gail Peace, and I'm the founder of Ludi. I've been at this for 9 years now, but I've been in healthcare, oh gosh, do I have to say? It's probably going on 30 years now. Yeah, happy to be here.
Thank you for joining us in studio. We are so excited because not only are we excited about you, Gail, and your story and hearing about the trends and the challenges and all the things that you've been seeing in the healthcare space, especially this past year, which has been unbelievable with what we've seen happening all around us. But we're also excited because for the first time in over a year, all of us are in the same place, in the studio, together.
Yes. I'm so excited to see you in person, Gail. I know, we've known each other for many years now, and your story is so inspiring. You're such a great leader, and you're just a mover and a shaker and doing some great things. So I'm so excited to be here in person and also allow you to tell your story.
Well, I appreciate the invitation to tell my story, and that certainly is high praise coming from you, Tammy, because I certainly feel the same way. It is great to be here in person, though, seeing everybody and not wearing a mask.
It is nice to be in person, and I am so excited because Tammy knows so many cool people, and I get to follow her along on this podcast and get to hear their stories, so I can't wait to hear about your background. And so real quick, I know Tammy already knows this, but catch me up to your past and all of this. How did you get here? What is your healthcare story to getting to where you're at today?
So I started in healthcare after graduate school, and I started in the hospital world as a fellow and then worked in hospital leadership for many years. And then I would go outside and usually sell some kind of SaaS product, some kind of software product to hospitals, but always around the business development or physician alignment aspect. So I would leave and go sell for somebody for a while, and then I'd go back to a hospital and run business development. And so my last relevant stint was with Vanguard Health Services in the Chicago market, where I ran business development for 4 hospitals there. And then I just kept running into the same, stepping on the same garden rake, as you might describe it, where this hospital-physician relationship can become tricky if not done well. And physicians were always mad about not being paid or not thinking they were being paid correctly. So I had the idea to create a suite of products that would help in that space. And so that became Ludi almost 9 years ago. June 7th is our anniversary.
So you're coming right up on that at the time we're recording this.
That's correct.
So tell us more about how that works. I mean, a lot of folks out there that have been in healthcare for a very, very long time, there's so many nuances of healthcare. So typically, how do hospitals pay providers?
That's an excellent question. So many people don't realize that doctors are not always necessarily employed. So half of the physicians roughly in the country are employed by a hospital system or by a large group. And then the other half are independent. And so they would be a 1099, if you will, right? So you're either a W-2 if you're employed or a 1099.
I had no idea.
Yeah. And so there's many relationships. Hospitals have to have physicians oversee other physicians. They have to have them provide on-call coverage. They have to have them with teaching and research. So there are various agreements that memorialize that relationship. And so our space is really anytime a hospital pays a physician, we make sure they're doing it right. So it's not about the patient care per se. It's not about the insurance or any of that kind of payment. It's about the relationship that either I'm an employee of a hospital and I'm a medical director and I have an on-call arrangement, or I'm an independent physician and I'm in a co-management deal and I take call for this hospital. So all of those activities have to be paid and they have to be documented very carefully because it's such a highly, as Tammy knows, a highly regulated industry. And this relationship gets a lot of scrutiny, certainly from the OIG. You have to do it correctly.
Yeah, it gets complicated very, very fast because not only do you have those relationships with the provider and the hospital or the physician in the hospital, but then also their relationships with the payer, the insurance company, the ACO, and all of those are kind of tracked separately but together.
Exactly. That's right. So I just had the idea to create this software that would make it easier for doctors because I'm a huge physician fan. I mean, the reason I've been successful is I understand the mechanics of the doctor drives everything. And so where hospitals go amiss, in my opinion, is when they forget that because they're a partner and they may be your employee, but you can't treat them like normal employees. They're a little bit different. They're really independent contractors almost, even if they're employed, because they're driving their own business and really responsible for their own patient care revenue, and they understand the expense side. So I've always been a huge fan of physicians and really figured out there's probably a better way to provide visibility for the hospitals into what they're spending because it's a blind spot. So we've really created a financial category that's different. It's a different way of assessing what we call physician spend, what the hospital's spending across all of these buckets. And so when we have the opportunity to sit with the CEO or CFO of a hospital, I can do numbers really fast. I'm kind of a number savant, and I can multiply things in my head and really make them take pause about their own business. And then usually they're very intrigued with, how do you know that? Are you sure? And then we'll begin this process of several years, and then they'll come back and say, no, you're right. We are spending that much.
Is there an example of how those numbers look? Is there a common, like when you're talking to a CFO, is there something that you know that based on like what you see right in front of you, you can quickly calculate some things that surprises them?
Yeah. Okay. You're asking my secret sauce. I do have a very fast calculation. So for an employed physician, they generally know how many physicians they employ. I use 300,000. So if they say they have 200 physicians employed, I multiply that by 300,000. And then I multiply that number, I double it. And that's what they're spending on everything. And that part surprises them because they may know their physician employment spend being 600 million, or 2,000 would be 600 million. So what is that? 60 million. If they generally know that part, but they don't necessarily know that they're spending on call and the big PSAs they have for pathology, lab, radiology, anesthesia. These things are very expensive. Those contracts are big. And so what we really do is help the hospital really understand financially. We pull it all together in one location because their current financial systems don't run this way. It's not at the invoice level of the doctor. And that's what we create.
Yeah, it is amazing. You know, the longer you work in healthcare, the more you can see that people are doing things the same way they've always done them, but the healthcare market changes. And so having that level of granularity on reporting and knowing what your costs are is more important today than it's ever been.
You know, it's true. If you don't measure something, you can't manage it. And so what's astounding to me is, you know, they'll be wrong on their number by millions, off by millions when we have these discussions. And then I'm sure I leave and they go start pulling it.
They start panicking like, oh my goodness.
They go try to figure out, okay, in the accounts payable system, it might be in 95 different general ledger numbers, right? It might be a medical director. It might be teaching. It might be called oversight. It could be called so many things. And then that number you get, you don't know which doctor that is, what service line. It's difficult for the hospital to look across the service line and understand what they're spending. And another fun area is trauma centers have a tremendous amount of call. They'll spend between 20 and 32 million a year on call only because everything has to be, all services have to be available, right? If we need them to come in a trauma center.
So I'm still learning some of the specifics. So on call in this case, what does that mean and why is that so important?
That's a great question. So if you are a trauma center and you get a stroke patient who arrives, so with stroke, for example, and there's other certified stroke centers, so maybe that's not the best example, but with stroke, for example, we need to get TPA into the person within 4 hours so that that clot is dissolved and there are better outcomes. So you need to have a stroke, you need the
Someone's gotta be
cardiologist there. You need they need to be right there with the medication ready to go. Same thing for trauma. If you have a brain injury and you need, a motor vehicle accident and you need a neurosurgeon, you need them like now. They need to have blocked their time. And even if they're at home, they need to be able to be there in 20 minutes. Because when the ambulance call comes in, they know who they're going to need. And then they trigger those doctors to get in. And so the hospital has to pay them thousands of dollars to just be available if needed for those things. So orthopedics, neurosurgeon, cardiology, you need all of them. OB, anesthesia, all of those things have to be at the ready. So it gets quite expensive.
And that's just one of many examples. And all across the board, that's a lot of numbers to keep up with. And before your solution, how would someone do this?
Excellent question.
Not well?
Well, by hand, they would do it. They would answer part of the question today and part tomorrow, perhaps. But I also think we're trying to get the market to think about this differently. We're trying to get hospitals to think about their physician spend as a number they need to monitor every day. Because your strategy from last week may be the same thing you need next week. And take COVID. We'll get into that, I'm sure, in a few minutes. But everything changes, right? And so your physician arrangements need to change. And if you don't even know where they are or what they look like or what you're spending, then how are you doing that correctly? So take service lines. If you're trying to really build out your orthopedic program and then you look across all your service lines and you find you're spending 4x on cardiology, maybe is it an opportunity to dial back some of those expenses and put more into orthopedics? So I just don't think people have thought about it that way. And I've always been in business development. So when I worked in the hospital, my game was get a new doctor, get a relationship in place, and then dial that back so I could take the money and go do something else, right? Once you kind of get them in the door, then you don't need the same service over time. They set up a service line for you, 2 years of hard work, and then it kind of rolls into maintenance. So maybe it starts at 40 hours a month and it goes down to 20. So then I would take those dollars and go invest them elsewhere, would be the way to really do it, to optimize your physician spend, if you will.
So Gail, your system does a phenomenal job on actually measuring those hard costs. In our world, we're implementing provider relationship management systems, tracking referrals in, that kind of thing, and just making sure that the provider has the access to people at the hospital very quickly and in a very comfortable way, because it's hard, to have that communication back and forth. And there's a lot of soft cost measurement as well as hard cost measurement with that use case. But in your scenario, there's probably some soft costs too that have to do with physicians getting paid appropriately, because if they're not, they're not going to want to work with the hospital. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good analogy too, because, the physician network with using software like what you all do, the hospital needs to know who's where, who they're aligned with, and kind of measure that. So it starts really with your side, on the CRM side. Our return on investment is really in 4 buckets. One is a revenue growth side, where by documenting things properly, your cost report, you can actually pick up some revenue. So that's kind of a fun side, revenue growth. And then there's really 3 areas of either cost avoidance or saved expenses, but a lot of them are soft. So it's people's time. So if I can take approving a time log each month from 20 minutes down to 10, I've saved 10 minutes across how many people, and we calculate those hours, of course, but then sometimes the finance leader will say, well, I'm not going to let those people go. Well, no, but maybe they'll be focused on something that's better and more revenue producing or patient care related rather than chasing, time logs around. And that's a large part of what we do is the doctors have an app on their phone and they record necessary documentation using that app, and then things are approved electronically. So, there's the savings of the expense time, and then there's this whole bucket of risk avoidance, which is if we have a Stark Law violation, how much will it cost us? And the answer is somewhere between $500,000 and probably $100 million, depending on what the violation is. So our software can really help on the compliance side, but it's not really why people buy it. I would describe that more as a soft benefit, really, Tammy, like you were describing. And then the other side that I really think is the biggest part, which is where I started, what are you spending? If you're spending, $2 billion across some of these large systems, if you do it a 0.25% better, that's a lot of money.
Yep.
And I don't think hospitals I think it's time they have to look at this money. They're stepping over piles of money to get to the pennies today to find cost savings. And when you really shine some light on this, you figure out better ways to align or, errors being made that you didn't realize that could cost you later. So yeah, a lot of soft costs and some hard ones.
I love that analogy, stepping over piles of money to get to the pennies. I may use that. Is that okay?
Yeah, of course. You can totally copy that. I got it from one of my old mentors. She used to say that all the time. I love it. I never really understood it till now. Now I get it.
Right. That probably happens a lot, and it makes a lot of sense. Now, on this show, it might be interesting to hear. I want to go back to when you were saying you're a huge fan of physicians, because there's a thought I have here that I want to ask you. If they're driving the outcomes, right? And in that case, driving the transformation, how often do you think physicians are misunderstood within these health systems? And how are you helping them? Because if they're the ones kind of, they're doing this with a great team around them, if they're misunderstood or if there's misconceptions about them, that's also going to lead to maybe not as good of care, right? Or not as strong outcomes. So I'm just kind of curious, is there anything that comes to mind with that?
Yeah. So it's interesting the way you phrase that. If you think about, physicians in general, they're very competitive by nature. And all you have to do is give them data and they self-correct. So if you think about, as we're trying to move the needle on patient care and improve things, part of my earlier career, I spent a lot of time in structuring co-management deals where we would sit down with the physicians, agree to co-lead a service line, and then we just would data dump. We'd bring reams of data in and watch their faces. You don't need to post a scorecard on who has the highest costs. No one wants to be the one with the highest costs. So what I find in just really respecting physicians, respecting their training and where they're coming from. And so I do think it's hard because hospitals have woken up overnight and they have huge physician enterprises and they don't have the software, the structure, things in place to manage that appropriately as its own entity. And they're moving toward that. Now we're seeing some of the large systems have whatever the system name is, physician services. Mm-hmm. And it's very focused on the employed doctors, which I keep saying, wait, hold on. You've still got all these 1099 physicians you cannot alienate.
Right.
And you need to be partnered with. So, another funny thing that came to mind when you asked that is you think about electronic health records in a hospital. It's about the hospital getting paid. So all of this extra work for doctors to document, click, click, click. They're using Epic, they're using Cerner, fill in the blank, Athena, click, click, click. And it slowed them down in a very large way when these things went live. What's fun about our software is it's about the physician getting paid. Yeah. And it takes them 10 seconds to figure that out. So we have probably 11,000 physicians using our software. Not a problem with getting people to use it. Maybe there's some grumpiness in the beginning. This feels like extra work or a little bit Big Brother. And we'll say, well, make no mistake, it absolutely is Big Brother because this relationship you have is very scrutinized by the OIG. So as long as you record what you're doing and we pay you correctly, it's all going to be fine. So it's been interesting because doctors are never my problem. It's the first line supervisors in the hospital that are so busy and never have time to do their approvals. We can see how long it takes for physicians to submit, how long it takes for people to approve. And the outliers are always those first line approvers are just very busy.
And you were saying that half the physicians are not employed. So some cases, physicians are supervising other physicians. Is that what you were saying earlier?
Yeah. So if I'm the leader of a service line, part of what my job is to do what's called peer review. And so the hospital has to pay doctors to peer review other doctors. You and I can't roll in and say this doctor's doing something wrong or that wouldn't be accepted, right? Because we don't practice medicine. So how could we police each other, right? So as part of the medical staff, there are bylaws that describe how all this happens. But the peer review is a very common thing that takes place. And so usually the medical director has some aspect of that. And that's what the hospital pays them an hourly rate to do. And it's very organized.
This makes it easier now.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. This makes it easier for the hospital to pay the doctor correctly, succinctly, per the contract. We calculate everything in there so mistakes cannot be made. If there's an annual maximum and the doctors hit the maximum, we'll keep taking the hours, but no payment will be made. So we can do things with software that you can't remember in your head. I feel like I have a pretty good memory. And at my company, when I went over somewhere around 25 clients, I couldn't remember the start date of the contract and the dollars anymore. I used to remember all of that. And so as you have hundreds of physician contracts, you can't expect people to keep track of that.
Yeah, there's no way.
And there are these things called contract management systems that are lovely for your vendor contracts, but not for physician contracts. I mean, that it's disrespectful to, first of all, call a doctor a vendor, right? That irritates me when we get called that. I don't know if you feel that way, Tammy.
Yeah, I want to be a partner.
I know. I hate that word vendor.
Yeah. So, Gail, COVID changed a lot in the world, and specifically in healthcare. A lot has changed, and everybody now is excited like we are to be here today. We're coming out of this, knock on wood. We're all looking to the future of what's going to happen next. How are things going to change? Tell us, when you look in the crystal ball, for Ludi and just for healthcare in general,
Okay.
What are some of your thoughts?
I'll start close to home related to that physician-hospital relationship. First, I would say COVID really already stressed out providers, doctors, other clinicians, nurse practitioners, nurses. And so I think with COVID, what we've seen is some physicians and other clinicians have retired earlier than maybe they would have, or they are disenfranchised and take some time off. So we're seeing hospitals need to lean more on people to fill in, which are called locum tenens. They have these contracts with providers who may come and serve time for a week or a month or 6 months while they recruit other physicians. So I see the physician turnover being a problem, and also the happiness, the physician burnout is just pretty high. So I think COVID has really contributed to that. I would say on the healthcare side with COVID, we've seen some really cool things happen that should have happened a long time ago. Telemedicine, that technology has been there how long? But insurance wouldn't pay for it. They were forced to pay for it during COVID. So I don't think you can take that back. I think that's going to stay. And there's many other things we've started to see evolve differently in the care provision. I'm most excited in like the behavioral health space, because really having apps and outreach and some of that online check-in can really pay off in some of those areas that we haven't seen before. And then we're seeing some crazy models evolve. I do think someday in the future, the hospital will just be a cost center. It's not there. We're not there yet. We still have fee-for-service medicine. We're not in the value-based world. Only 5% of our country is really in that movement. So I think that's still a ways off. But I do think that hospitals, many more services will be provided at home. We're seeing some really interesting models where inpatients are cared for in their home.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just only going to continue. So I feel like it kind of opened up the hospitals to technology in a new way.
Yeah, well, it forced a lot of things that then made people realize that the change is not as hard as they thought, because change is hard.
Yes.
But when you're forced to change, then you see, well, that wasn't so bad.
Yeah, there were great stories. One of our large clients is a national not-for-profit, and they had telemedicine in many of their clinics, but not all of them. And the numbers were astounding. Within a 3-week period, they stood up like 4,000 doctors on telemedicine within a 4-week period, because they had to, so they could see their patients and still continue service. So it is kind of neat. And we call on hospitals, obviously, they're who we sell to, and they don't want to see us now still. I mean, I know we're together in this room, but the protocols in the hospitals are still pretty strict. So they really are more comfortable with Zoom. And we used to just sell things on the phone without Zoom, even though we could have turned our video on. So now it's kind of fun because we do more and more with our current clients with Zoom calls, because they're lonely in their home. I think they kind of want to see us too, because many of our clients aren't necessarily the ones that still went into the hospital during COVID. If you're in the finance team, they might have left you at home, for example.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah. So I think more of that to come.
I love it.
So, Gail, we've known each other for a while. When you moved to Nashville, we got introduced. We love this town, this community, and we think it has so much to offer as it relates to healthcare, and specifically healthcare IT. So tell us how you got here.
Oh, that's an excellent question. So I actually started Ludi in Chicago.
I did not know that.
In Cook County. Not exactly startup friendly, even though they're trying to make efforts. In the ecosystem might have been described stronger in Chicago than in Nashville in those years, for example. But I found once I got into my, I don't know, maybe fourth year. Yeah, the third, fourth year, the tax situation in Chicago was killing me, absolutely killing me. So, things that are delivered via the internet in Cook County, you have an extra tax on them. And plus the payroll and, it was difficult. So I had raised venture capital out of Chicago. Martin Ventures backed us in 2014. So a couple years in, and I really wanted to get down here to be closer to the organization. And at the time, the Entrepreneur Center was coming into fruition and HealthBox had a program here. I'd done HealthBox in Chicago. So I really traveled here a lot, calling on all of the hospital companies that are based here. And I fell in love with the city, and it just really felt like there was more of a, what I needed to get the company going, being close to the venture capital firm, being in an environment where the ecosystem was growing, the Entrepreneur Center being, very close and a great place to make connections. And then, Tammy and I, of course, met through the Entrepreneur Organization, which I then joined by coming here, which has been an amazing path for us to have. So yeah, I love Nashville.
Yeah, it's very entrepreneur friendly.
Plus the weather's better. And I've always liked country music. So then you have that.
There you go.
Country music's coming back now. I mean, there's some good things, and in the studio, we've really tried to make it feel like Nashville. We got the guitar hanging up on the wall. We've got, we're really trying to make this feel that way. So, and we're in the Entrepreneur Center right now. So what I also love about what you're sharing about EO, it's great to have so many, especially healthcare entrepreneurs, who are trying to solve these big problems together. It's a very collaborative atmosphere, as I've been learning more about that. So what a great place to be. And ultimately, everyone we talk to on this show, it's how are we making healthcare better and how are we using transformation to make that happen? So you're doing all the things. And I'm just so glad we could have you in here and catch up, hear the latest, and see where you're going next. So what's a good way for someone to connect with you and the team? And
well, through our website would be great. And it's www.ludiinc.com. So LUDIINC.com. You can also find me on LinkedIn. Gail Peace is the last name. And yeah, I would look forward to connecting.
Thank you so much, Gail. You're amazing.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me. This was fabulous.
Thanks for listening to How I Transformed This, Success Stories of Transformation in Healthcare, presented by Versus 12. To learn more about how Versus 12 is best situated to transform the healthcare industry and to follow along with this show, be sure to visit versus12.com/podcast. We'll see you next time. To learn more about how Versus 12 is best situated to transform the healthcare industry and to follow along with this show, be sure to visit versus12.com/podcast. We'll see you next time.